So a few weeks ago, I revealed the secrets of my common screws box and told you all the screws that I use on a regular basis. Today, I'm going to unveil the mysteries of my plug box. Hiya folks, and welcome back to a very empty and echoey workshop. As promised, I had a lot of people asking me not only what sort of screws I use on a regular basis, but also what sort of plugs and other fittings I use on a regular basis. So I'm going to take you through my common plugs box, which is kind of plugs that I carry around and bits and pieces that I carry around to pretty much every job. And of course, if you've ever wondered what this thing is, hang around and I shall tell you a little secret later on. It's Baltic in the workshop and it's beautiful outside. The one problem this workshop has is that it's so well insulated that in the summer it actually stays really cold until you've put the heating on for a bit. So stuff it, I'm not staying in my freezing cold echoey workshop. I might as well take these in the house to show you. So I'll take you through everything as quickly as I can because there's quite a lot to cover off here. What I'll do, I'll tell you what every individual thing is and then I'll go into a little bit of detail about what I use each thing for. So starting at the top here, we've got Easy Fix hollow wall anchors. These are 5mm M5 by 43 hollow wall anchors. We've then of course got the Fisher Duo Power plastic plugs, just 6mm Fisher Duo Powers that I'm using there. We've then got more Easy Fix hollow wall anchors M5 by 52s that we've got there. We've got the Core Fix dot and dab, find the other bit. The Core Fix dot and dab fixings, I've made a video about these before. These are an awesome problem solver for dot and dab walls, for putting heavy things on dot and dab walls. Those are, well, it's a 10mm hole I think that these use. 10 by 95s I think. I'm not sure what the screw size is, but yeah, 10 by 95s are advertised as. We've then got space plugs. Space plugs are an amazing problem solver. I keep them kind of folded up in my plug box, but the way you use them is that you turn them that way round. And then you've got an adjustable spacer that you can put a screw, obviously, all the way through there into whatever substrate you're attaching into, and you can adjust the thickness by just twisting that. Space plugs are very handy. I've normally got a selection of the regular and large ones. I seem to have mostly large ones in here. They're the regular ones and they're the large ones, and I just keep them like that just so they take up a little bit less space while they're in the box. As I say, I just keep a small selection in here more for problem solving. If I'm going to do a job where I need a lot of these, then I'll carry them separately. But this is more of a kind of problem solver view of things that I take to every single job. We've then got Fisher GP or LDF fixings, 6mm, just plasterboard fixings, little plasterboard fixings. We've got the Easy Fix wall bolts, also known as shield anchor bolts. These are M8 by, well, they're M8 by 60mm, these particular ones. They need a 14mm diameter drill bit for these. I've already made a video all about those. I'll include a link in the description. We've then got ye old faithful, just Fisher 6mm standard red plastic wall plugs. We've then got the Fisher 8mm brown plugs. I've got a bunch of Fisher 5mm yellow plugs in that little container there as well. We'll come back to this section. I've got a whole load of different washers. Again, just problem solving really. Everything from great big washers through to much smaller washers. A whole selection of washers are infinitely handy to carry around. Then in this section here, as I say, I've got the 5mm yellow Fisher plugs in this little container. I'll just keep them in here so they don't get lost, although I've got one that's somehow got out, along with some very random screws. I've also got a whole selection of screw caps in here as well. I've got white screw caps in there. I've also got a selection of the sort where you can remove the cap and put the cap back on, the removable type that go underneath the screw head. They're very handy to have. We've then got over here more easy fix hollow wall anchors. These ones, I don't use them very often, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the size of them. I think, well, they're definitely M5, and I've measured them and they seem to be 65mm, but I can't find 65mm ones on the Screwfix website. I don't think they're 70mm. Maybe they are. They're the 70mm seems to be the biggest ones after the 52, but if you measure them, anyway. So M5 by something, by 65. They're much bigger. I'll come back to what I use them for. And then finally, in this section, spacers. A whole selection of different size spacers. A few people have asked where I buy the spacers from. These are all left over from TV brackets that I've installed where you get millions of spacers with them. But you can just buy them on eBay or Amazon or whatever. But yeah, spacers, very handy to have. What's that? Washery thing. So in terms of what I use everything... Oh yeah, sorry. These are neodymium rare earth magnets. Very, very handy to have in a problem solver box like this. I use these for if I'm trying to find where studs are in walls. What I'll do is I'll use a detector on the wall, and then you can just use these little magnets to mark each of the screw heads as you go up the wall. And then after you've got a few of them in, as I say, use a detector to make sure you're in the right general area, and then just stick a few of these on. And then after, you can see how strong they are, crazily strong magnets. Again, you can pick these up off eBay, Amazon, dead easy to get hold of. These very, very handy. And it just means you can mark where all the screw positions are if you're looking for a stud to attach something into in a wall. Unfortunately, because a lot of modern houses are now getting built with metal studs, that makes these more and more awkward to use, but it does mean that you can kind of find a metal stud running up and down a wall, or it could equally be a pipe or cable or something nasty. But in nominally older houses that have wooden studs, you can use these for finding your studs, basically just looking for the screw heads. So in terms of what I use everything for here, the M5 by 43s, hollow wall anchors, basically it's a choice of these or those. Sometimes you run into hollow walls where you can't physically get the longer version in. I generally prefer to use the longer version, the M5 by 52s, but if you find that you're hitting something or this screw is just too long or whatever, then you can always switch over onto the 43mm ones. And a little trick that you can do as well, what you can do is you can use the 52mm one, use the setting tool to expand it, and then if you're finding that the screw that came with the 52mm one is too long and it's hitting something inside the wall, after you've expanded it, you can obviously take the screw out and then just use the screw out of the 43mm one instead, and then you run less of a chance that you're going to actually hit something inside the wall. Common scenarios where you run into that problem is fitting curtain rails in new builds, where you'll find it's relatively hollow around where your curtain rail is going often, because it's dot and dab the plasterboard, but then you'll have quite a big gap and then the lintel. So obviously you can't use traditional plugs like this because you're into a steel lintel, so sometimes it's easier to use a hollow wall fixing, but sometimes these will be a little bit too long and you're hitting the steel lintel. So in that scenario, if you find that screw's hitting the lintel, just switch to the slightly shorter screw. It's just a problem solver thing. The Fisher Duo Power, we've talked about these before. These are a great problem solver because if you're fitting stuff onto a dot and dab wall, normally, if they didn't exist, if I was fitting stuff onto a dot and dab wall, wherever the wall was solid, I would probably be using the little red plugs, and wherever the wall was hollow, I would probably be using something like that, assuming that what you're putting on the wall isn't particularly heavy. If it is heavy, then you go all the way through to the blockwork or the brick and you use these all the way through. But the advantage of the Duo Power is that you can just use those for everything. Now do bear in mind, because I've had a couple of comments on my video about duo powers where people have been using these for putting quite heavy things on hollow walls. These are not designed for heavy things on hollow walls. Don't use these for heavy things on hollow walls. By all means, you can use them for relatively heavy things in solid walls, because they just then behave like a normal red plug, kind of. But these don't really offer much more staying power than these. I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but if you want to fit something heavy onto a hollow wall, you're going to be looking more down this kind of territory, like your expanding metal anchors or your spring toggles or a whole load of other fixings that are designed for that. So just bear in mind, I use these so I don't have to keep on switching between these, basically. Core fix, as I say, we've made a video about it. These are designed for dot and dab walls where you need something to bridge the gap between the plasterboard and the blockwork, and I'm not going to go into that. I'll put a link in the description all about those. Space plugs we've briefly talked about, great problem solver. These ones, okay, the little Fisher LDF or GP fixings, really handy if you're just putting loads of stuff that is relatively lightweight onto hollow walls. So things like pictures, mirrors, things that, you know, just lightweight stuff. You can't use red plugs on hollow walls, they'll just spin and they'll fall out. You need something a bit beefier, so these do the job just fine. And to be honest, the little Fisher GP fixings, I'm sure they performed slightly better than the duo powers. So if all you're doing is fitting lightweight stuff onto hollow walls, I would generally use these. Personally, that's just my personal taste. But if it's onto dot and dab and I'm going to be constantly switching between those and red plugs, then I personally find it easier just to use those on all of them. But as I say, don't use duo powers or the GP fixings for anything heavy. They're not designed for it. Big wall bolts, these are designed for really heavy things. So, you know, really heavy TVs on cantilever brackets into solid walls. These are only for solid walls. They're not for hollow walls or anything like that. As I say, I'll pop a link in the description to the video that I've made about these already. But if you've got something crazily heavy to fit, these are the sort of things that I would generally use. Red plugs, general purpose, use these all the time. They're only for solid walls, but these handle an incredible weight if you use the correct screws. You can, of course, use brown plugs if you desperately want to, but I've found that the weight bearing capacity or the load bearing capacity between the red and the brown is nominal anyway. In fact, in some situations we're getting higher loads on the red than the brown, but it depends on the substrate that you're going into. So I'm definitely not saying don't use brown plugs. I wouldn't be carrying them around if I didn't use them. It's just most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, red plugs do the job. If you run into a problem, I made a tips video about this before, and if you run into a problem where maybe the hole's a bit too big or the hole's kind of falling in on itself, what you can do is try a brown plug in and even pop a red plug inside the brown plug, and that can help you out of a hole, but like hammer it in, and that can get you out of a bunch of tricky situations. The little yellow plugs are generally only for stuff that if the screw needs to be so small that it's too small for a red plug, then that's what the yellow plugs are for. And that's why I've got a bunch of tiny screws in there that I can use for, you know, you might have a picture or a mirror that has a keyhole bracket on it and you just can't get a normal screw through it. So as I say, I've got some screws in here that have got slightly smaller heads on them, and those are too small to use with red plugs, so for that I would use just the little 5mm yellow plugs instead. Screw caps, I'm not going to talk about any more than I already have. These ones here, the mystery ones, which I can't remember what size they are, these hollow wall anchors, the way they are measured in terms of size is really weird, because those are 43, those are 52, and those are whatever, 65 or 70, and no part of them is that measurement. So this, let me get a tape measure of some description. So you can see, so that the 43mm ones are, well, the screw length is probably 45. The length of the actual fixing, the bit that goes in the wall, is probably 35mm. So I don't know which bit of it is supposed to be 43mm. Likewise, the 52 one, the screw is closer to 58mm, and the fixing itself is probably about 49mm, 50mm. So I don't know, again, I don't know what is supposed to be 52mm on that. And likewise, on the mystery ones, if we go for the screw length, we're looking at about 70mm on the screw length, and the fixing itself is about 61mm. So I don't know. Either way, the reason that these are handy is because they have a wider gap here. We've got about a 20mm gap here, so when these expand, these are really designed for thicker hollow walls. So if you've got a hollow wall, say with tiles on or something like that, what you can do with these, I'll probably make a video about it, but you can use these on tiled walls, but you just need to use some pliers to flatten out the spikes. But the spikes flatten out really easily if you just get some long nose pliers on or whatever, and you can flatten the little spikes on it, and then you can use these on tiled hollow walls, no problem. And because tiled hollow walls are going to be quite a bit thicker, you're going to need something with a bigger gap between here and the bit that expands. Like if you compare it to one of these, you see that is just designed for the thickness of the plasterboard and no more. That is designed for up to, I would say, about 20mm or thereabouts. So that's why I've got those. And then we've already talked about the spacers. Whenever you fit a TV bracket, keep the spacers. They are infinitely useful. So there you go, folks. My plug box. I hope you found that useful. If there's anything I've kind of forgotten to talk about, or there's anything that you want to know about, do post it in the comments below and I shall do my best to get back to you. Obviously, different fittings are available in different countries, so depending on where you are on the planet, then certain things might be available, or there might be different solutions to things. Obviously, I'm in the UK. This is just the way that I do things. I'm not saying anything that I'm doing here is right or wrong. It's just the way things have kind of evolved over time. Anyway, separate from all of that, in another life, I reckon I would have been a farmer. I've always had a passion for gardening and doing outdoor jobs and all that sort of thing. Unfortunately, it's probably too late in life for me to retrain and become a farmer. But if you want to join me for some virtual farming, then please do so over on my Andy Mac Drums channel, where I'm putting together a whole load of farming simulator videos where you can basically watch me farm a pretend farm. It's the most relaxing thing in the world, as I'm sure you're aware if you've played that ridiculously addictive game. I'm also starting to do a few live streams on that account. I've never done live streams before. These are literally my first attempt at live streams ever, so please bear with me. But if you do want to join me for a bit of a chat over on my Andy Mac Drums channel, then keep an eye out for the live streams. It's been great fun doing it so far. I've enjoyed chatting with you while farming a few pretend fields and baling straw. Anyway, link in the description and in the pinned comments. But all of that stuff's over on my Andy Mac Drums channel. As per usual, please take care, folks, and I shall see you next time. Tatty bye!